Chapter 5. A while later, Jessica found herself in a stable yard. Her sneakers traded for tall boots, her sweatshirt replaced with a green tunic. The air was sweet, with the aroma of summer blossoms paired with the earthiness of the farm. Her new friends led her to 4 majestic creatures called bicorns, each a unique color. One was a fiery red mare that never seemed to stand still. The other was a massive silver-blue beast with long fur covering his hooves. The last 2 were more normal gray and light brown. But the double horns on their heads were a clear sign they were not horses. "Are they magic?" Jessica asked. "They look like unicorns."
"When I see a bicorn clean up after itself, I'll believe it magical,"
Misa snorted. "I can't remember the last time I've seen you clean up after a bicorn either." Taryn climbed up on the dainty honey-colored bicorn. The beautiful beast tossed its white mane like a parade pony. Misa scowled at her brother.
"Frostfire prefers to live outside, so no stall for me to muck," Misa replied, turning to Jessica. "Bicorns are horses, but much smarter and much more useful against an attacker."
Jessica wondered what type of attack her cousin referred to, but she chose not to ask. She desperately didn't want to seem naive to the older teens. Misa climbed up on the feisty red bicorn, and Nico effortlessly vaulted onto the massive silvery blue creature. Jessica wondered if the man's cat-like appearance also gave him unusual muscular strength. There was something about the way Nico moved that reminded Jessica of an acrobat. Jessica was left standing in front of a gray-dappled mare they called Stone Maven. The creature's twin horns were clipped shorter than the horns on the other bicorns. Jessica had never ridden a horse before. She grabbed the saddle, put her foot in the stirrup, and tried to climb, but she became unbalanced and slid back to the ground. She grasped the saddle again, feeling eyes upon her. Again, she tried to climb onto Stone Maven, but the bicorn stepped to the side, nibbling on a patch of lavender flowers. "I've never ridden before," Jessica admitted. Nico sighed, and Jessica felt the sting of embarrassment. Taryn came to her aid. "We will teach you," he promised, as he dismounted, righting the saddle and tightening the straps that held it in place. "Just be quicker in your hop." His words gave Jessica confidence. Her cousin handed her the reins and explained how to signal to the creature. Her enthusiasm was short-lived because once Jessica was on Stone Maven's back, the beast refused to move.
"Kick her harder,"
Misa advised. Jessica followed the instructions. Stone Maven responded by rearing and unceremoniously dumping Jessica on the ground.
"I told you this was a bad idea," Nico said. "But by all means, let's keep doing this all afternoon."
"Oh, shut up,"
Misa said, helping Jessica to her feet.
"Don't listen to him. He's just a blusterbelch with no sense of adventure."
After a few more ill-fated attempts, it was decided Jessica would just ride with Misa. Using an overturned bucket as a stepping stool, Jessica climbed behind her cousin, enveloped in the smell of cinnamon. They left the castle behind, traveling into the woods on the warm summer day. The paths were narrow, but the air was cooler underneath the lush tree canopies. Jessica wasn't sure of the time of day, but it seemed earlier than it had been on Earth. She became delightfully lost in the richness of the wildlife. Insects buzzed in an ever-present orchestra of chirps and chitters. Tiny little dragons chased bugs in the fields, and purple raccoons scampered through the trees. Strange little long-tailed rabbits munched foliage, and toads with feathery heads lazed in the sun. The group traveled across a small wooden bridge over a pristine pond. In the water below, little brown hippopotamus turtles waded through the mud. Water sloshed up onto their patterned shells. "What are those?" Jessica asked.
"The birch,"
Misa explained.
"They're a little tough, but they taste good in a sauce. It needs to be peppery, though."
A shimmery white bird flew by and landed on a branch ahead. Its long, elegant tail feathers reflected splashes of the sun.
"What's that?"
Jessica asked.
"Oh," Nico said. "That is a fire dove."
What makes it different from a normal dove? Is it like a phoenix?
There's no such thing as a phoenix, at least not that I've seen.
Nico pulled a few large berries from a nearby tree. He was a very confident rider, and it seemed like Moon Tower obeyed him whether or not he held the reins. Nico tossed the berries at the bird in rapid succession. The fire dove hissed angrily, displaying a small yet wicked set of teeth. It spread its wings, and a red line of feathers appeared down its back like little menacing spikes. Whoa, that's an angry-looking bird.
Its claws are poisonous, too, Nico explained. But yeah, it's not wise to anger a fire dove.
They traveled along, crossing the paths of nearly a dozen more creatures. Again, Jessica forgot the world she so quickly left behind. The forest soon gave way to a meadow with deep grass, and then they came to an overgrown road. They passed old signs that Jessica could not read. As they approached houses, her companions explained that she could not say she was from Castle Aurumice. She was to say she traveled from the north, near the Bay of Corvallian. The overgrown road intersected with a well-graded dirt road. They passed little farms, cute round structures, and livestock. With the appearance of cobblestones, the village became the city of Turbalis. The sun had climbed high, and the buildings provided a bit of shade from the oppressive heat. Jessica had no concept of time. She had left her world on a dreary late autumn afternoon. She seemed to have arrived on a summer morning. A red building came into sight as they crested a little hill. On the side was a painted sign with a black horse. The boys dismounted, but Jessica realized she was unsure how to get down.
I'll hold Frost steady. Swing your leg over and slide down on your belly, Misa said. But don't land directly behind her. You might get kicked.
Wait, explain again how I do this without breaking myself? Thankfully, Nico was at Jessica's side, guiding her to the ground.
I can't imagine what it's like to have never ridden, Nico said. Around here we ride before we walk. You must have ridden in the old days. You just don't remember. It will come back.
Jessica nodded. Taryn paid a stable boy. The child was cat-like, his ears large and his eyes yellow. Jessica tried not to stare at the stranger and instead adjusted her satchel, running her hands across the leather embossed with griffins. They left the inn on foot, traveling in the fair's direction. Jessica's eyes could barely process the world around her. Every building they passed was unique, and she realized how cookie-cutter suburban Pennsylvania had been. The Centernian dwellings and businesses were a symphony of color and shape. Some buildings were tall, some short, some painted in bold patterns or unique brickwork. The people they passed were the most amazing sight of all. Some were more like cats. They had eyes that shone like gemstones and elegant faces with sharp, pointed teeth. Some were more like humans, but possessed hair every color of the rainbow and markings upon their skin. There were other species as well. Jessica saw one family with horns walking as delicately as deer. A man with folded bat wings playing guitar on the street corner. Jessica was afraid to ask too many questions, not wanting to seem out of place as they approached a flat, open field, lined with brightly colored tents. The fair was set up in a field that bordered a well-maintained harbor.
That's the River White, Misa explained. It was the main commerce hub of Turbalis.
Jessica found it odd that Misa said, was. How could such a beautiful river cease being essential to the economy? The girl didn't have a chance to ask. Her eyes were inundated with the visual treat of the fair itself. They began to wander through the tents and booths. Jessica couldn't identify half the aromas she smelled. Her heart felt as if it would burst out of her chest. Misa held tight to her hand, bringing the girl from booth to booth. Jessica was introduced to so many foods and objects that her brain could barely process all the wonders. Misa purchased a bag of cookies in a little crinkly paper sack. She shared the treats with her companions.
You need to be careful what you eat for now until you get used to our world again, Misa warned her. No water, no unpeeled fruit, nothing raw. Now this is safe and delicious.
Jessica took the cookie. It was the color of a graham cracker with bits of red fruit. The flavor was so bright, sweet, but not too sweet. A fruit she had never tasted.
Sundrop berries,
Misa explained before Jessica had a chance to ask. I have no word for that flavor, Jessica said. How can there be a flavor with no word? Misa laughed joyously. Jessica's happiness extended beyond the fair. Her cousins were so friendly toward her. Except for Lee, Jessica had never experienced so much warmth. Misa seemed as curious about Jessica as she was excited to show her the fair. Nico and Taryn followed close. They seemed happy, but Misa was a bright ball of energy. Everyone seemed dim in comparison to her. Misa, this is the most amazing fair I could imagine, Jessica said.
Someday you'll see the Holy Circus. They really make a festival.
What's that?
They're followers of the goddess Aurora, Nico explained. Someday they will return to Turbalis.
As they walked along, they passed booths with people signing up for competitive events. The lines were long, and the area was crowded. Suddenly, a scuffle broke out. A lion-faced man was shoved through the crowd. People hissed and spat at him.
Curse castlefolk! We don't want your kind! Jackdog! Take your bad luck elsewhere!
A burly group of men carried the stranger to the dock. He fought, cursing. They threw him into the river with a loud splash. The man struggled, swam to the other shore, and slunk away in shame. His mane and clothing were plastered to his dark tan body. No, you don't, Taryn said to Misa, grabbing her arm. Nico ushered Jessica away from the scene as Taryn dragged his sister away.
That was gibberty,
Misa hissed.
We can't just leave him.
Misa, now is not the time to deal with this. It happens every day. What's wrong? Jessica asked Nico.
We do not want trouble,
he whispered in her ear. People started staring in their general direction, but Taryn and Nico quickly pulled them through the crowds. They darted left and right, cutting through people and around booths. They slowed down when they had crossed nearly halfway through the fairgrounds. Misa wrenched her arms away from her brother's grasp, massaging her wrists. She glared. Nico dropped Jessica's hand.
I apologize,
he whispered to her, his blue eyes troubled.
It wasn't a safe spot to be.
I wasn't going to create a scene, Misa protested. Jessica felt uncomfortable, but Taryn put an arm around her shoulders. Jessica, Taryn said quietly. He was one of the people Misa is trying to help. Why didn't we help now? Because, the white-haired man whispered, there would have been 5 of us and about 500 people who would happily throw us all in the River White. Jessica didn't like his answer. She would not forget about the lion-faced man. They continued their browsing of the fair. Misa was cross, but eventually warmed back up, delighted by livestock displays of little multicolored goats. As they rounded the corner, the group came across a lavish tent with a blue dragon and a gold text symbol. The text was one aspect of Centernia Jessica found annoying. She could understand people speaking, but their written language eluded her.
Just what I was looking for,
Misa smiled, gesturing to the tent.
I will be elsewhere,
Nico said suddenly. As will I, Taryn echoed. Before Jessica could question the boys, Misa grasped Jessica's arm, leading her cousin to the tent. What is this? Jessica asked.
I need to introduce you to a friend,
Misa replied. As they approached, Jessica could see a long line of people waiting outside the tent. 2 members of what Misa called the Day Watch, essentially Turbalis police, stood outside the entranceway. Misa held Jessica's hand, excused herself to the guards as she pushed open the tent fabric and scurried past. They were not amused. A blue tiger man grabbed Jessica by the arm, his muscular fingers pressed into her skin.
It's all right,
Misa grinned.
I'm a friend of the lady.
Don't care. Everyone waits in line, the guard growled.
Katie!
Misa shouted into the tent.
Katie, we're here!
It took Jessica's eyes a moment to adjust to the tent's interior. It was lit by a series of yellow stones placed upon small blue pedestals. In front of the tent was a long, ornate table set upon a dais. A stately white leopard woman was behind the table. Her uniform was the same blue of the tent, trimmed in ornate gold piping. The leopardess's brown-striped hair was pulled up in an intricate series of braids.
"Let them pass,"
the white leopard commanded.
"They are friends."
Misa gave a Cheshire grin to the sentries. Jessica's arm was released. Katie left her post behind the table and greeted Misa with a warm hug.
"I am so delighted to see you again,"
Katie said, smiling.
"And I am so happy to be back home." "And I've got so much to tell you," Misa replied. "You have a minute?"
The line of people outside the tent already seemed irate. Jessica rubbed her arm in annoyance. If the people had to interact with the guards, it was no wonder they had little patience.
"May we meet for an evening meal? I have so much work to do here,"
Katie said.
"Treballis has been without a mage for so long that the need for one is grossly overdue."
Misa's eyes became serious. It was the first time Jessica had seen the girl not erratically grinning.
"This is critical,"
Misa said softly.
"I only have this brief span of the afternoon. We need to talk now." "For you, anything,"
Katie said, then turned to the sentry.
"See that the line remains orderly."
Turning back, she gestured to the two girls.
"Come this way."
Katie led them to a seam in the tent panel behind the dais. They quietly slipped out of the tent on the opposite side of the line.
"We need someplace private to chat,"
Misa requested.
"I have just the place,"
Katie smiled.
"Ribbons is done until nightfall. No one should be at the field."
Jessica did her best to follow the two women in the warmth of the summer. They moved rather rapidly through the crowd, and she was afraid she would lose them. They dodged in between tents and past livestock, only pausing when they came to a bench at the end of the deserted athletic field. A few lazy picnickers sat in the grass between poles with flags. Jessica felt bold and directly addressed Katie. "May I ask what it is you do?" Jessica inquired as they approached the field. Katie stopped short, looking at her quizzically.
"Well, I am a mage of the consortium representing Castle Nova and the Polaris Academy. Today I am passing judgments for civil suits,"
Katie explained.
"I make certain local governments, such as Treballis, are consistent with the laws of Castle Nova."
Jessica nodded. Misa grinned, tying her unruly black hair up in a ponytail.
"Kate, you have no idea who this is, do you?"
She gestured.
"I apologize."
Katie shook her head.
"I do not." "Oh, think!
Misa was hopping with excitement.
"You know who this girl is."
"You are a member of the castlefolk?" Katie guessed, her voice above a whisper.
"No,"
Misa whispered.
"This is Jessica Vance."
Katie's jaw dropped.
"You did it?"
She grabbed Jessica's hands.
"In all the glory of the goddess Aurora! Artemisa Wynter, how did you ever break open that gate?" "Well, that's my secret now, isn't it? Jessica, I would like to formally introduce you to Lady Katie Cosette, mage of the consortium, newly appointed mage of Treballis, member of the castlefolk, and one of my best friends." "If you are here, is Lily here?"
Katie squealed in delight. The refined mage dropped her mask and now seemed to be closer to her true self. A young woman barely older than Misa. Jessica instantly liked the leopard.
"Your mother is one of the most amazing mages I have ever met,"
Katie said.
"I miss her."
Jessica was puzzled.
"Yeah, Jessica, your mom is a mage."
Misa shrugged.
"Not only is she one of the best fighters Aurumice's guard ever had, but she can hurl lightning and freeze things. Her control was so refined,"
Katie expanded.
"To be able to have that sort of kinetic control at the molecular level is amazing."
"That's not my mom." Jessica shook her head. My mom is not some magician, and she is not a warrior.
Mage strengths don't work on Earth, Misa explained. So there, she's totally normal. Did you bring the shadow sphere?
Katie's voice rose with excitement.
Is that why you're here? You have it! Misa already told me that's what we need.
Misa glanced around, obviously worried people would overhear. They seemed far enough away from the picnickers that it wasn't a concern.
Misa bit her lower lip. Not quite yet. I'm working on that one. Soon, I hope. Which means the energy field will be down. And I was wondering how the deal with Traballis was going.
Katie sighed.
Progress has been made. The Council of Traballis is pretty narrow-minded. I have gotten the fine down to 600,000 bits, 20 acres of wood, and 10 years' service in the mines of Bryken.
Misa was unhappy with the numbers.
You can't get them to change the fine? Misa, the energy field stuck an invisible fence through the main path of commerce. People know about river jumping all the way on the other side of Castania. The council is more furious than a blusterbelch caught in a rainstorm.
Sorry, Jessica interjected. Can you please explain a bit? Misa hasn't told me everything.
People can't pass through the energy field. It's like a wall, and unfortunately it crosses a small part of the River White. So, pretty much to get a trade ship through, you gotta abandon the ship, send it on its way, and hope it comes through the other side.
Misa laughed.
It's really a sight to see.
What about the other part? The fines in prison?
I'll explain more later.
Misa grinned.
The details are a bit boring and still in flux.
But wait, we crossed the field, so why can't you help the trade ships? Jessica asked.
I've been a bit busy,
Misa whispered.
And Nico never leaves home. And Taryn doesn't really tell people who he is. Ever. It's pretty amazing they both decided to come with us today. Is Nico here? Katie interrupted. I have yet to see him. I thought I saw Taryn in the city last week. They're in the fair, floating about, Misa said. Speaking of which, I need to find them. We have one more trip this afternoon. Oh? Katie smiled. Going to the gardens? The Marian Spa? The Temple of Aurora? No, Rockwood.
Misa smiled. Katie's enthusiasm dimmed.
Why would you bring her to that cesspool?
Misa shook her head. Her smile faded as well.
Kate, that cesspool is where most of the castlefolk live. You haven't gone there like I told you, have you?
Katie looked away.
Well, I have been very busy with the work of the consortium. Don't be like Nico and Taryn. I am telling you, most of the folk ended up in Rockwood, and not by their choice.
Misa's voice dropped.
Anyone with a mark of Aurumice is now branded as one of the cursed ones. No one within 3 cities will give them legitimate work. They have no choice but to live in that slum.
We're going to a slum? Jessica did not like this change of plan.
You'll be fine,
Misa whispered.
Trust me, you will want to see this. Do you want me to escort you there after I'm done?
Katie offered. Misa smiled.
I don't think we need your protection, honored mage. Speaking of which, would you mind giving Jessica a little show of your power? My pleasure.
Katie gave a little curtsy and stood tall. She gestured to 2 water barrels. They rose from the ground 10 feet in the air. The barrels slowly lowered, and the water remained in midair, crystal balls of shifting liquid. The effect in the sunlight was dazzling. Jessica couldn't believe her eyes. The water exploded apart, splattering them.
Sorry.
Katie was sheepish.
Still working on the fine control.